Talking Points. My name is Dr. Stephen E. Gardner, and I'm here with another segment on Talking Points. We're living in some very troubling times. We're living in some times that challenge our vision, that challenge our faith, that challenge the status quo, the way things used to be. And in light of all that we're going through at this present time, many of us have seeds of hope and seeds of faith. We've got dreams within our hearts, dreams within our lives that we want to believe and that we choose to believe will be fulfilled. Yet, when storms, tribulation, things that are troubling, such as what we are experiencing now with the COVID-19, we oftentimes forget, or oftentimes our dreams, our desires, our wishes, our hopes becomes buried by the overwhelming information and the overwhelming thoughts that bombard us about our present circumstance. Today's message is designed to help you in the midst of all that you're going through, practicing the common sense that we need to practice, holding on to the faith that we have in our higher power, and in our higher power that I'm referring to today is our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. As we hold on to that truth, I want to share with you today that no matter what you're going through, no matter how it looks, don't give up upon what you see and what you believe. And so today, that's what we're going to talk about. No matter how it looks, don't give up on what you see and what you believe. And this is a retelling of the story of Joseph. We visited this story some time ago, but I think it's one worth repeating and one worth retelling for what we're presently faced with and how we can adjust our lenses and keep our hope alive and not succumb to despair or any other mindset that deters us away from believing in what I dreamed and in what I believe. So the truth is, everything happens for a reason. The scripture tells us in Romans 8:28 that, quote, all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose, unquote. Everything happens for a reason. And lots of time when we have received some sort of insight, some sort of idea, and we begin to work on it, it's one of the most exciting times of our life. And it's exciting to have goals set. It's exciting to have dreams. It's exciting to have some divine revelation given to you about some future happening in your own life. Yet, oftentimes when these things occur, there's a process that we go through that doesn't look like the way we first believed or the way we hoped. Sometimes in understanding his purpose, we can wind up being short-sighted, confused, and even weary. I think that by being short-sighted and confused and weary, some may attribute that to a lack of faith. Let me put it this way. I call it all about being human. And there's none of us out here that at some time we believed God for something, or sometime we believed something about ourselves and something about our future, that we got disillusioned along the way. Or we become short-sighted, or we might have had a misgiving. All of this is part of the process. Or sometimes we may be even confused. We may have said, well, did I miss God? That isn't because you question whether or not you miss God, whether that's a lack of faith. It is simply an expression of where you currently are and how you're trying to navigate through this time. And even when we're pushing forward, sometimes we become weary. The scripture tells us, yet when the scripture tells us and informs us and encourages us to what? Be weary in well-doing, for we will reap if we don't faint. And the word reap, if we don't faint, simply means that there's a payoff coming if I don't quit. There's a payoff coming if I don't stop believing. Keep believing. Hold on to the dream that's within your heart. Nurture it and water it with faith, with prayer, and all the things that you know that are going to help you to hold on to the dreams that you have in your heart. So when we talk about the story of Joseph, those of us who've heard this story of this biblical character in the book of Genesis can recall, I know you can recall his ups, his downs, the ins and outs of this story. However, for the benefit of those who've never heard this story, let me say this. Joseph's story is about a common man with an uncommon vision. Let me say that again. Joseph's story is about a common man with an uncommon vision. He was the least likely person in his family who dreamed a dream that one day that his family would bow to him. His brothers, irritated by his dreaming, sold him into slavery. And while in slavery, he was brought to be a servant. He was bought to be a servant. And inappropriate advances from the man's wife had him unjustly sent to prison. Yet it was there in prison, the lowest point of his life, when he could have given up. Yet there, his gift made way for him. And the price that he paid in prison led to his reward in the palace. So in this retelling of Joseph's story, we will learn how we can be everyday men and women and see our uncommon vision come to fruition. Because we're all common people. And when God showed you something or you believe something that's larger than you, a cause that's bigger than you, it's an uncommon vision. And there's some things we can draw from Joseph's story. We can sit at the feet of Joseph's story and learn some things. We can draw from this fountain and inspire ourselves to not to ever, ever give up on what you see and on what you believe. Well, Joseph, in this telling of the story, he was set up from the start. Or as my folks would say, he was set up from the get-go. Point is that that Joseph was 17 years old, and while he was shepherding the flock with his brothers, he was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report to them, to their father. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other children because he was a son of his old age, and he made him a long robe with sleep. So here is setup number one, that Joseph's father favored him above and more than all the other children. Because why? It was somebody that he could be proud of himself, that in his old age, God blessed him with a son. But when his father saw him, when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his brothers, guess what? They did what any other normal person would do. They envied that. In this case, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Joseph was set up from the start. Verse 5. Once Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even the more. And he said to them, listen to this dream that I've dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Suddenly my sheep rose and stood upright. Then your sheep gathered around it and bowed to my sheep. And his brothers said to him, are you indeed to reign over us? Are you indeed to have dominion over us? So they hated him even the more. Now he was already hated because his father, loved him more than the other kids. Now, because God is showing him something, because he has this dream in his heart, he's again entering to more of a setup stage. And, because they didn't want to listen to him. Then, verse 9 said he had another dream and told his brother, saying, look, I have had another dream. The sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. But when he told it to his father and his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what kind of dream is that you've had? Shall we indeed come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow to the ground before you? So the brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Joseph was set up from the start, not only from the natural way as how his father was treating him, and from the spiritual way and how God was revealing a possible future of what, in his context and how they interpreted, one day you're going to rule over us. One day I'm going to rule over you, and you're going to have to bow down to me. Well, that sounds like look at the setup there. That sounds like an unlikely situation. He's in a dilemma. God done told him something. At the same time, he's faced with some impossible odds with his own family. Sometime when God tells you something, you are faced with a natural situation or some impossible odds that might seem to threaten or challenge what you believe. No matter what it is, don't give up upon what you see and upon what you believe. So Joseph's factor here, Joseph's youth was a factor in his disbelief. Number one, he was a very young kid. Now notice all of the other kids were older than Joseph. So he was a youngster compared to them. And so Joseph's youth was a factor in their disbelief. How is it that this young whippersnapper can believe these things? We've been around a long time. We've been around much longer than he is. Plus, our daddy loves him more than the others. So his youth was a factor in their disbelief. Sometimes our youth can be a factor on how people judge us. Now, obviously, I'm not young in that regard, but maybe there's some young person out there or some younger person out there. Or even if you are my age and you consider yourself still young, maybe there's something that you believe that because of your youth, it becomes a factor. Sometimes people don't want to listen to you if you're younger than them because those who are older feel like that they know more. I believe it's for this reason as to why the Apostle Paul told Timothy in 1 Timothy, I believe it is, chapter 4, he said, let no man despise your youth. But he goes on to tell his son Timothy, or spiritual son, but be an example. Be an example. Don't let no man despise your youth, but be an example. So Joseph was faced with this factor of disbelief because of his youth. Secondly, the problem we see here, Israel's preference to Joseph over others created a social environment that breeded envy, that jealousy and discontent. And sometimes we may find ourselves in social environments that are filled with that. God's told you something, your youth is a factor, and at the same time there's a social environment that is not supportive of the very thing that you're believing will happen in your own life. Yet it was this mixture that Yahweh saw as an opportunity to institute his plan. Let me tell you something. God doesn't think the way we think. The book of Isaiah said, just like the heavens are higher than the earth, so are his ways and our ways, and his thoughts and our thoughts. Sometimes God looks for impossible situations that when he shows up and shows out, our faith is not placed in our ability or in our capability of bringing something to pass, but our faith is transitioned from ourselves to the very power of God. And this is, I believe, is one of the things that God used, that Yahweh used as a way of instituting his plan. He waited till the factors were right. He waited till the factors were, and the odds were against him. Then he began to speak to him and began to use his circumstances. Sometimes, this is something we can take away from this. Sometimes it is not wise to tell your dreams to everybody you know. Do I need to say that again? Sometimes it is not wise to tell your dreams to everybody you know. Sometimes excitement and immaturity will cause us to share things that could have waited to a more appropriate time. And so what we have here is some truths that we can learn. Jesus said, don't cast your pearls before swine. Sometimes we need to have what I call shut mouth grace. We need to be discerning as to who to let in on the secrets of our heart, especially our dreams, especially those dreams that are dear to us. Sometimes in our excitement and immaturity, we start to blab off about God revealed this to me, this is going to happen, and we might tell it to some people that may not have our best interest in mind. Or we might say it to some people that don't like us anyway. Or we might say it to somebody that God may not be speaking to them like that, and we may get that, resistance back from them. They may not come out and validate your dream right away. In fact, they may give you a smirk or they may quit talking to you altogether. Sometimes when you have something so precious, you got to be careful about who you allow to regard the very pearls that God's placed in your heart. One of Joseph's problems that we see here is that his immaturity caused him to run his mouth. His immaturity caused him to run his mouth. And we can see very clearly here that his mouth got him in trouble. It's on the one hand that his very father favored him more than all the other. Yet on this hand, God started to talk to the one that was already getting this preferential treatment from his father. He was in a setup, as it were. It was the right mix that God chose to work in. God chooses many times to work in situations and circumstances that we might say, well, God ain't got nothing to do with that. God is not behind all that. God can't work in a situation like that. Let me tell you, God is much bigger than how we think. Yet we can learn on how to preserve what we say by choosing when and where and whom to say it to. Pin it. In Genesis 37, verses 19 through 21, we look at the first segment. He was set up, now he's pitted. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from a distance, and before he came near to them, they conspired to kill him. Now, wait a minute. Now, his own family wanted to take him out. His own family were looking to just off him in some kind of way. And they said one to another, here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him. Man, they were vicious, weren't they? And we shall see what shall become of his dreams. But when Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands, saying, let's not take his life. But instead we find they threw him into a pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they took him to Egypt. So we see that he was pitted. Well, what can we draw from this? Some dreams take a vast detour before you arrive at your appointed destination. Now, wait a minute now. This is not going according to plan. This is not happening the way that I dreamed it. This is not happening the way that I planned it. Yet, we find that his dreams have taken a vast detour. Let me put it like this. No dream sprouts up without being planted first. Each of us have big dreams. Who have had big dreams have been pitted at one time or another. But the thing I want you to learn today about the pit is the place that paves the way to the palace. The pit is the place that paves the way to the palace. And not only is the pit a place that paves the way to the palace, but the pit is a place where we lose something. Joseph lost his identity in the pit. He went from being a son to becoming a slave. The pit is designed to remove whatever is standing in the way of our future harvest. Now, Jesus put it like this in St. John 12. Except the seed fall into the ground and die, it abides alone. But if it dies, it produces a harvest. Joseph was thrown into the pit, and it was there he got pitted. But that pitting that he experienced in the pit was the place that would prepare him for the palace. That outer shell of who he was as a son had now been shedded, and now he must go through the process of being a slave, only again to return at a time of being a son and a future harvest. Jesus' very own words is not just words about his death on the cross, but his words to reflect upon a vision or dream that you might have. And sometimes we get dreams and visions that in essence, they do die. Or in essence, they go inactive, or they submerge themselves, they disappear. And we go through a process. Yet at an appointed time, God always resurrects that which is useful. And if that dream is real, if that dream is for, and when I'm doing my part, God's going to do his, it's going to come to pass. We have to trust what we see and in what we believe, and not be moved by it. So let us be informed by Joseph's story, who never gave up on the dream that he had in his very own heart. Well, now he was set up, he was pitted, now he's potted. Let's look in verse 36 here. It said, meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him into Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. Now Joseph was taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. He was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him. Notice that. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hand. Now Joseph, we find this in Genesis 39:7, he was handsome and good looking. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, lie with me outside. However, she kept pressuring him, but he maintained his integrity. Let me say this. Keeping faith is the power of choice. Remaining faithful is the power of will. Now here in the midst of the process, And oftentimes we go through a process to where we experience, some challenging times, and sometimes those things are so challenging that our own integrity is put to the test. We choose to have faith, but we have to remain faithful. Some things that we go through, we need more than just the power of belief, but we need the power of the power of the fruit, as it were. The fruit of the Spirit we find in the book of Galatians, and one of those fruit is that it says the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long suffering, and it says in the King James faith, but that word there means faithfulness. Faithfulness sometimes is the fruit that we need to finish, the journey that we're on, to walk the walk that needs to be walked, to work ourselves through the process that has thrown us into the pit and thrown us into the pot, till we're able to get ourselves into the palace. So I'm going to say it again. Keeping faith is the power of choice, but remaining faithful is the power of will. Put it. He's been pitted, potted, now put it. After 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed a dream. And the cupbearer remembered Joseph in prison, saying, "We dreamed on the same night, and he and I each having a dream with its own meaning. And a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each according to his dream. As he interpreted to us, so it turned out. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. Then Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he hurriedly brought him out of the dungeon. The result was that Pharaoh favored Joseph and placed him over a substantial portion of his kingdom. It was during this time that the dream that Joseph had in his youth, that's when that dream came to fruition. His brethren were in famine, and he was promoted to a position that enabled him to provide for them, just like he dreamed he would, but not the process it took to get there, nor the form of rulership he had imagined. His latter turned out to be greater, because he never gave up on his dream. He never gave up on what he believed. In the midst of what we're going through, there's no test and no trial that's forever. Even how we're being tested through COVID-19 in every dimension, in every industry, in every aspect of our life is only for a season. Yet, as we navigate through this season, don't give up on your dreams. As we seem to fare through this time, don't give up on what you believe. Don't give up upon what you see. Your latter will turn out to be greater. Though this process that you're going through right now is not comfortable and it's not pleasant. And in some cases, you may have to pay extra attention to the ones that we love as we go through this process. But as we do that, let's not forget, let's do like Joseph's father did when Joseph told him the dream. He kept those things in his mind. He kept those things in his heart. While you keep your dreams and your vision in your heart, take care of your family and take care of yourself. Never give up on your dream. Never give up on what you believe. Well, that concludes today's segment on Talking Points. I trust you've been blessed. Come back and visit us again the next time we're here. Until then, may God bless you and keep you in this very special time in all of our lives. We'll see you soon.